You stared blankly at a red and purple sky, eyes lazily watching the clouds roll by and the half-visible sun dip down and slowly set. You leaned forward to capture that perfect in-between moment, smiling as the last sliver of the sun finally dipped behind the horizon, letting the sky gradually shift from warm pinks and oranges to dark blues, indigos and purples. You sighed and sank into a more relaxed position as your eyes welcomed the appearance of the moon as it took to the sky, washing the park in its gentle white light. You sat at the same rotting wooden picnic table you sat at every night. A familiar book with kitty skeletons draped in red and black across the cover sat just beneath your hand. The lukewarm coffee you'd picked up hours earlier sat right next to the book, half empty from your lack of interest despite it being your favorite kind. You'd even considered dropping by your dorm to throw it in the freezer, to beat yourself with later if you kept thinking about a particularly annoying green-haired boy, before coming here. But you found that you just didn't want to be on campus more than you had to. Being out and about decreased your chances of running into him. You let your eyes stray from the steadily appearing stars and to your right, where Midoriya had sat just a few nights ago. You let out a frustrated sigh, turning your gaze back up to the sky and raising the cup of coffee to your lips. It didn't taste amazing right now, but it served as a good enough distraction to stop thinking about him. You'd done the right thing, whether you cared about Midoriya or not. You wouldn't let yourself be manipulated. You would not come running back into his arms only to be forgotten when other things in his life became more important than you again. It was better this way. You told yourself, trying to convince yourself that you would only distract Izuku from his dreams. You'd only get in the way and end up broken again when he realized that. You flicked the book open and skimmed your eyes over the pages, the illustrations of grim-themed yet still cute cats above each new chapter momentarily consuming your attention. Your soft smile faltered when you stumbled upon a particularly strange-looking cat with wild curly fur and huge round eyes cowering underneath a couch. Your eyes lingered on the drawing. Everything about it just screamed Izuku. You shook yourself out of it and flipped to the front page, breath hitching when you noticed a sticky note attached to it. It was in the handwriting of the clerk you'd grown familiar with. She often scribbled funny quotes or little notes into the books you purchased, for you to laugh about when you stumbled into the shop again. He was here today. Wanted me to slide this to you once you came in. Not quite sure if he knows that secret admirers are supposed to be discreet. Kiko. You almost smiled at that, not doubting for a moment who she was referring to. But then you knitted your brows together in confusion when you noticed an arrow at the bottom of the note. Curiously, you unstuck the unusually heavy sticky note and flipped it. Your heart stopped functioning entirely when you saw a familiar bracelet taped to the back of it. You gasped, tearing the bracelet from the note and inspecting it closely. No way! There's no way he even remembered this existed. It was a colourful and cute bracelet with mostly green beads and white lettered ones spelling out All Might. The sight of the bracelet brought you way back, and suddenly you were no longer outside the park. Instead, you were laying on your stomach with an impressive fort of blankets hanging above your head, your small hands fiddled with the beads, tiny fingers slipping on each random shaped bead you could find in your craft box that was remotely green in color. Across from you laid a much smaller Izuku on his belly with his nose buried in a comic book, eyes sparkling and lips noisily slurping at the straw of a juice box. Traveler, look! The curly-haired boy squealed, shoving the comic book over to you and pointing at a panel of a very stylized All Might, with multiple civilians draped over his shoulders. It's a familiar frame from the video you've watched with the boy about 1,000,000 times already. You personally didn't idolize the symbol of peace as passionately as your friend, but it always made him happy, so you always watched it with him. You squinted, scrunching up your nose at the picture.
They drew his hair wrong,
you complained, pointing at the clearly exaggerated shoujo-looking hairstyle the #1 hero had been illustrated with.
No, that's just the artist's style,
little Izuku exclaimed, standing up in the fort, proudly posing in his All Might onesie, holding the comic book up into the air like it was Simba.
Oh!
You remembered humming thoughtfully before returning to tying an S-clip to the end of the bracelet, looking your newest creation over with pride. You sat up too, looking anxiously over to your best friend who had engrossed himself back into the comic.
Give me your hand!
You vividly remembered the young boy's freckled face lighting up and his hand being shoved in your direction. You slid the way too big bracelet over his tiny wrist and looped it around a second time so it wouldn't fall off.
Here! So everybody knows you're the next All Might!
His big green eyes overflowed with tears, almost flooding your blanket sanctuary and drowning you both in his own tears when he tackled you to the ground, hugging you tight. You remembered him showing the bracelet off to all of his friends and Ka-chan the next day. He wore it even more religiously than his hero onesie, his mother even mentioning that he only took it off to bathe. You recalled your shock when a week later he dropped a similar homemade bracelet with your favorite colored beads and your idolized hero's name on it. It had been the first time anyone had ever made something for you, and you cherished it.
We match now! So that means we gotta become big, strong heroes together when we get big!
You remembered his high-pitched voice declaring with his best All Might impression. You felt your eyes burn with salt and the telltale weight of tears welling up in the corners of your eyes, your fingers shaking as they clutched the bracelet. Despite how old the plastic piece of jewelry was, it was in outstanding condition, save for a few scratches on the bigger beads here and there. You thought that he'd lost it or thrown it away a long time ago. It's been years.
How on earth did he still have this?
Feeling your breath start to quicken, you shot up from your seat, grabbing the book from the table and dashing off towards UA. You turned each sharp corner, narrowly avoiding crashing into several other students, including Bakugo who hissed and swore at you as you retreated to your dorm. You shoved the door open and slammed it shut. The next 15 minutes were spent digging through your stuff, looking through untouched boxes of your things you brought from home, but never needed until now. And then you finally found it tucked away in an old pencil pouch. You pulled out an all too familiar bracelet, holding up to compare to the green one in your other hand. There was no doubt about it, it was real. Your fingertips traced the familiar beads of your own bracelet, eyes flickering between it and its counterpart.
Why? Why did he keep it so long?
You kicked the box back into the closet and towed the door shut, tossing both bracelets onto your nightstand and flopping face down onto your bed. It didn't matter. It was just a bracelet, nothing more than a flimsy piece of plastic, nothing compared to the friendship you had. So what if he held onto some dumb bracelet? That didn't make up for months of distance, weeks of him slowly forgetting you existed while you stood idly by, letting it happen because you cared too much. So why did you feel so guilty? You groaned exasperatedly into your pillow, snuggling your face into it when it started to soothe your headache. Your eyes opened suddenly with a furious glower when your stupid brain immediately thought back to the times you and Izuku would nap together when you were kids. Anywhere. Anytime. You often played so hard you knocked yourselves out so his mum would find you cuddled up against one another in your blanket forts. On the couch, on the slide at the park, under the sink once. Anywhere you could fit into and doze off, you would. In fact, you didn't shake the habit of napping together until you were at least 13, which is usually around when parents start getting suspicious, so you stopped doing it. You felt a slight blush rise to your cheeks, remembering those special times in middle school when you would sneak in and sleep together for a while if one of you had a nightmare. That was most likely the most rebellious thing you two innocent little suck-ups ever did. You sighed, eyes drifting over to the bracelets strewn carelessly across your nightstand. How can one bracelet bring back so much nostalgia? Midoriya was slumped miserably against one of the couches in the dorm lounge, pen shakily scribbling away at an assignment. His handwriting had gotten a little better since last year. Still wobbly and inconsistent in places, but his teachers had voiced their appreciation of its improvement. He thought back to earlier when he had dropped off that bracelet at the bookshop, afraid that if he approached you, you wouldn't want to see him or he'd start crying again. It really tore him apart inside to part with it, having kept it for so long. He'd found the bracelet while looking through some of his things one day. It fell out of a box with a bunch of his older, more beat-up action figures. Seeing it after being put away for so long had brought the biggest smile to his face, remembering how much he'd loved it when he was younger. It was also what made him remember you. It was as if you suddenly popped back into existence, and in excitement to share the memory with you, perhaps caught up with you over coffee. He had disregarded the fact that it had been months since you'd last spoken. He now realized his mistake. But after last night, he knew he didn't deserve to have such an important piece of you to himself. He absentmindedly wondered if you still had yours.
Probably not, huh?
His wasn't as pretty as the one you made him, and why would you keep it after he practically ignored you for a year? Still, he had hoped that just maybe there was a chance he could make it up to you, that he hadn't messed up so bad that you never wanted to speak to him again. Midoriya closed his eyes, frowning down at his notebook in shame. Who was he kidding? It was just a piece of plastic and likely held no value to you after what he did. He missed it. Already.
Midoriya?
Ida's voice piped up, and the green-haired boy jumped.
Oh! Hey, Ida. Did you need something?
He asked, trying not to sound as worked up as he really was, forcing a small smile.
I came to ask if you'd heard from Traveler at all today.
Midoriya's heart dropped at the sound of your name.
No. Why?
Well, it's just that several students claim to have seen her running obnoxiously through the halls earlier this evening, and I was curious if you'd happen to know anything about it.
Ida asked, straightening his glasses with a displeased expression, clearly not amused by your behavior.
No, I haven't. Sorry.
Midoriya admitted sullenly, eyes downcast to the floor. Ida's eyes softened and the brunette sighed, taking a seat next to his friend. Uraraka and he hadn't managed to get much out of the sulking Midoriya since the other night, but they suspected that things didn't necessarily go well between him and you. Not to mention he'd been a zombie all for days, barely getting any sleep at all these past few nights.
And as your friend, I am concerned about your well-being,
Ida confessed, pushing his glasses up closer against his face as Midoriya sighed.
I'm fine, Ida.
Midoriya offered him a half smile, but otherwise made no attempt to spill anything. Ida made eye contact with Uraraka across the common room, who had been the one to encourage him to approach Midoriya in the first place.
Midoriya, what happened between you and Traveler last evening?
Ida pressed, cautious not to pry too much in fear of upsetting him.
I messed up.
Midoriya looked down at his lap, a drawing of your face in the corner of his math homework. He abruptly turned the page, in hopes Ida hadn't already seen it.
Really badly.
The next morning, Midoriya was as sluggish and mopey as ever, worrying his classmates with his lack of enthusiasm.
You should talk to them.
Todoroki's cool voice shook Midoriya out of his daze after homeroom. He'd been staring absently at you as you ignored his existence, focusing on the lesson. It wasn't hard to guess who the half-and-half teen was talking about, and yet he still found himself surprised.
I've tried, Todoroki. Talking won't help.
Midoriya sighed, eyes dropping to his mess of notes, including several crumpled up drawings of you.
And sulking around doing nothing will?
Todoroki questioned, not able to recognize the shell of the boy in front of him.
I messed up. And they want nothing to do with me now.
And he respected that.
Something tells me that isn't entirely the case,
Shoto replied, and the green-haired boy sent him a puzzled look.
What do you mean by that?
He asked, a brow raised at the possibility that Todoroki knew something he didn't.
You forget that Traveler and I are close friends now, although you haven't necessarily been around, so you may not have known it all.
He stated bluntly, and it did nothing to comfort Midoriya at all. He hadn't known you and Todoroki were friends. What else did he not know about you?
What are you getting at, Todoroki?
Midoriya asked with a defeated tone, wishing the stoic prodigy would just be out with it.
Traveler tells me everything. Don't think they haven't told me about what happened a few nights ago. But when they spoke about you, it didn't seem like they didn't want anything to do with you.
Todoroki explained, definitely catching the young Midoriya's attention.
They're upset. Yes. And you aren't wrong to assume that they're angry with you right now, but the longer you wait to talk to them about it, if you plan to at all, that is, the longer it will take for them to forgive you.
Forgive him? Was that even possible at this point? He didn't know, but if what Todoroki said was true, and he actually had a chance, he couldn't waste any more time sulking around and doing nothing.
Are you sure that's even possible, Todoroki?
He questioned, eyes adept as ever as he searched the bi-colored eyes of his rival and friend for answers he may not even have.
I don't know for sure, Midoriya. That is up to Traveler.
Todoroki admitted, and Midoriya bit the inside of his cheek, still torn over this.
But I don't think they will forgive you if you don't try.
Midoriya nodded, thanking the two-toned boy and packing up for his next class of the day. Your ears perked up at the sound of someone knocking on your door later that night. You sighed into your pillow, not wanting to leave its soft embrace. You tried to ignore it at first, pretending to be asleep, but the insistent knocking continued. Grumpily, you pushed off of your comfy bed to sluggishly open the door, thinking it was most likely Mina, and she'd just keep knocking until you opened up. You were not expecting Midoriya to be standing there. "What do you want?" you asked, your voice holding no softness or enthusiasm, and your narrowed eyes stared coldly at your former best friend. He flinched at the icy tone of your voice.
Can we talk?
Midoriya asked anxiously, wringing his hands together, elbows drawn in close to his stomach self-consciously.
Please?
He met your steely gaze with his own apologetic ones, green eyes pleading with yours. Midoriya owned the most convincing pair of puppy dog eyes you've ever seen, even when he wasn't meaning to, and even now you faltered. "Why? Why should I let you in? Give me one good reason not to slam the door in your face and go back to bed.
Because I won't leave until I say what I need to say,
Midoriya stated as firmly as he could, a determined glimmer in his eyes as he did so. You didn't doubt that he might sit at your door all night if you refused him.
And I have a feeling you have some things to say too.
He wanted to resolve this. I have nothing to say to you, you hissed, stepping back into the threshold of your room, starting to close the door. But his hand smacked against the wooden surface, a desperate look in his eyes that only made you push harder. Move!
Please just hear me out, traveler. Please just give me this. Let me try. You don't need to forgive me. I just need you to listen.
He pleaded, his glossy eyes already spilling hot tears down his freckled cheeks. He was shaking.
Please.
Midoriya stumbled forward when the door opened, and he just barely caught himself, wide eyes darting up to yours as you took several steps away from the entrance. You crossed your arms. You couldn't believe you're actually doing this. You have 5 minutes. Start talking, you relented, sitting down on your bed. Midoriya sighed in relief, closing the door behind him before clumsily scrambling over to you. You patted the spot next to you, avoiding any and all eye contact. Midoriya's heart skipped a beat when he spotted his bracelet on your nightstand. So you did get it. His breath was caught in his throat when he tried to speak at the same moment his eyes drifted to your wrist, where a relic of your friendship dangled. You kept it. He felt his eyes overflowing, the ugly fat tears streaking down the sides of his face as he stared dumbfounded at the familiar bracelet. You have 4 minutes, you flatly reminded him, and he jumped, trying to think of the words he'd practiced just a half hour before he showed up at your dorm.
Okay,
When he failed to speak even after a good minute passed, you sighed deeply. If he had nothing to say, why'd he even come? What happened to all that gusto about saying what I needed to say? Why did you keep it? You asked out of the blue after an uncomfortable silence, and his head perked up, but he looked confused, eyes searching yours.
Keep what?
The bracelet. Why did you keep it? It's been years. I didn't even think you still remember that old piece of junk existed. You blurted out, each word sounding distressed and just confused. You wanted to understand. He stared at you, mouth agape at a complete loss of what to say. His mouth suddenly felt dry, and his tongue rubbed anxiously against the roof of his mouth.
Because it was important to me.
Midoriya breathed, the muscles and nerves in his hand twitching as it laid only inches away from yours.
I was so happy when you first gave it to me. My mom had to pry it off of me just to bathe me.
He chuckled, smiling at the memory.
And I kept it because it reminded me of you. It felt like there was a part of you with me even when you couldn't be there. It comforted me, knowing that you put so much thought into something just for me, and I felt so special.
He broke off when his hiccups started to get out of control.
And,
He choked and apologized, taking a moment to breathe again. You hadn't realized how much one silly piece of jewelry had impacted him until now. So much so that he was crying over it.
And I made a promise. Remember?
Midoriya sniffed, wiping his eyes uselessly with his hand, only really smearing the wetness across his cheeks and wetting his hand with his own tears as they continued to spill down the freckled planes of his red cheeks. You nodded, but turned away when you felt your own emotions starting to spike up. You bit your lip, held your breath, clenched your teeth. Anything to keep the tears at bay as they threatened to fall.
I said that when we matched now. So that means we gotta become big, strong heroes together. When we get big.
You butted in, sniffling and raising a hand to scrub at the tears streaming down your face and pooling at your chin.
That's what you said.
Midoriya stared at you, guffawed as you quoted his younger self. He hadn't expected you to remember it so clearly. It made him feel even worse, knowing how much it must have hurt you when you grew apart, how hard it must have been on you to keep quiet about everything while he lived his best life, forgetting all about his dearest friend.
Why'd you give it back?
You asked, voice trembling as you wiped your eyes with your arm. You glanced over at the green bracelet, lying on your nightstand.
If it meant so much to you, why give it back?
He closed his eyes. He listened to his heart as it slammed against his chest like a pinball machine, demanding him to say something.
Because I forgot about the friendship it represented, and I shouldn't have. I wish I wouldn't have, but I did. I broke my own promise, and even worse, I hurt you because I was just too caught up in my own problems, my own dreams, to remember that you've been a part of them since the beginning.
Midoriya sobbed. There was no point in holding it all in now.
I gave it back because I was so afraid I screwed up everything between us. And I don't deserve it. I don't deserve you.
The phrase rang in his ears so loudly it was almost deafening. He wanted nothing more than to say it too. He couldn't because he couldn't catch a single damn breath to say it. But even as he felt he had gathered that breath, it was stolen away once more when he felt your hands on his face. In a flurry of your own emotions and a nagging force of habit, you had reached out and grasped his face, the soft pads of your thumbs wiping at his cheeks.
Stop crying already! You had something you wanted to say, right? Stop letting your emotions get in the way of that!
The firmness in your tone as your stern eyes descended upon his own struck a chord in him. You've said something like that to him before. Years ago.
Stop crying, Izuku! Stop letting your emotions keep you from standing up for yourself! Kajan steps on you because he knows all you'll do is cry!
Multiple times.
Would you quit crying already? You're tougher than that, Izu. Like All Might.
Constantly.
Stop crying because you don't have a quirk. Become a hero without one.
It had always been you. You there comforting him, encouraging him, telling him to quit crying and speak up for himself, to keep pushing on despite the fact that he just wasn't as gifted as other children. How could he have forgotten one of the most important lessons you ever taught him? How could he have forgotten about you? You tugged one of your bunched sleeves down with your teeth and dried up the downpour of tears from his cheeks with your hoodie sleeve. Careful not to rub the skin raw, you kept at it until he was simply too shocked to cry anymore. This was the first time you've done this in years, yet far from the first time you've had to do it at all. Even as children, you were using your fingers, your sleeves, the edge of your shirt to wipe his tears away.
Shush! I don't want to hear it unless it's what you came here to say.
You interrupted, and the look in his eyes changed from nervous to determined.
I was going to say that I'm sorry.
He stuttered.
What else?
You encouraged, watching as he slowly gained more confidence.
You said you weren't going to leave until you said what you needed to say. Keep to your promise.
I was going to say that I don't deserve you.
And are you lying?
No!
Midoriya exclaimed more confidently. more certain of himself than before.
And is that all you wanted to say?
You asked again, smiling as the sobbing boy from before completely changed with your encouragement, egging him on.
No,
He confessed, faltering slightly as his nervousness returned. He didn't know if he was ready to say it yet. Would that even be acceptable right now? Even as strong as he felt right now, he couldn't help but hesitate, to blush, to avoid your gaze.
Then say it.
He trailed off, suddenly terrified of the thought. He couldn't. It would put everything on the line. Your hand cupped his cheek, coaxing him to look back up at you.
Stop hesitating. Tell me what you want to say.
He'd already put your friendship on the line. What difference would it make? You wanted the truth, so you'd get it. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes before opening them again, meeting your own straight on. There was a spark in those green eyes that wasn't there before he squinted them shut. It was like an emerald fire was lit behind them.
I love you.
It was quiet. You stared at him, and he stared right back, his determined gaze never weakening as he maintained eye contact.
You... What?
You heard me.
Midoriya replied. This time it was your turn to shy away. Your face darkened incredibly fast, heart racing against your chest as your eyes darted from side to side, deep in thought. Your mind threw numbers together into every equation it knew, each answer coming out the same. You had expected an
I want to be friends again.
or
I want a second chance.
or
I want to fix this.
never in a million years could you have predicted him to say that. Not to you. Your eyes drifted back up to his. He looked a little less confident now, almost worried as he awaited your response.
Get out.
You breathed, eyes wide as you stared at him, watching his determined face change to one of confusion. You couldn't believe it. After forgetting your existence for almost a year, after only remembering when he found the bracelet, after only wanting to talk to you because it was most convenient to him. And he had the goddamn nerve to say that he loved you.
What?
Midoriya gasped, not understanding what was going on. Suddenly you were pressing yourself against the wall farthest from him on your bed.
Get out!
You exclaimed, the angry tears running down your face.
Traveler, what are you saying?
His voice shook, the tears starting to fall from his eyes again. His nose beginning to run, as well as his entire body shook. Why were you telling him to leave? Did he make the wrong call? Did you not feel the same?
Why are you lying to me?
You asked, the question coming out like a whisper.
I'm not lying to you. I love you.
Midoriya cried.
Please, you have to believe me. I wouldn't lie to you. I've always liked you, since we were kids, Traveler. I can't fake that. You know I can't.
You shook as his desperate green eyes pleaded with yours, a sincerity in those irises you grew up staring into, a sincerity that just couldn't be faked. He actually loved you? But why? He ignored you for a year.
And you can honestly tell me that in that year you forgot about me, you loved me?
You demanded, your tears making your vision blurry and unmanageable.
I never stopped loving you, even if it was overshadowed by my dream to become a hero. Even if I made mistakes not even I can fix. My heart always belonged to you.
Midoriya crawled over to kneel in front of you on your bed, where you still had your back pressed to the wall, and your knees pulled tightly to your chest.
I'm not perfect, Traveler. I made a mistake by not being there for you, and I will do anything it takes to fix it if I can.
And you won't forget me again? You promise? You asked shakily, feeling a little embarrassed by how small you felt, scrunched up in such a way, and crying in front of someone other than your cat at home.
Yes.
His immediate response confirmed it, not an ounce of hesitation present in the way it rolled off his tongue.
I promise I'll never forget you, and I'll never be the reason you cry again. Can you believe me?
Midoriya reached his hand out to you.
I believe you,
you admitted, a small smile gracing your lips as you took his hand. Midoriya let out a relieved sigh, his free hand trembling over his heart. You could tell how terrified he was.
This doesn't mean I forgive you, though, Izu.
I know, and I'm going to try my best to make it up to you. I promise.
Izuku stated. It didn't bother him that you didn't say, "I love you," back. He wouldn't have deserved it. He was going to have to work for it, and that was fine with him.
Do you,
You started, face flushing and eyes avoiding his as you removed your hands from his face.
Do you want to hug it out?
Yes!
Ah!
You yelped when he threw himself at you, tackling you to the bed with his arms around you. You squeezed your own arms around him, face burrowing into his shoulder as you squeezed the life out of one another.
Sorry,
he muttered when he realized he was practically on top of you and most likely crushing you. He moved to roll off of you, but your arms only tightened around him.
No, please, can we just stay like this for a while?
You asked, and Izuku felt his heart beating so fast he was convinced it'd eventually just commit seppuku if it pounded any harder. He nodded against your shoulder, cheeks burning a bright crimson as he relaxed.
Also,
you spoke up, and he hummed in response. He couldn't be bothered to move. You reached over to your nightstand to snatch the green bracelet from it, the green-haired boy whining when he had to readjust after you started moving.
Give me your hand.
He pulled away, green pools swirling with confusion. He complied with your sudden request and gasped when you slid the bracelet back onto his wrist.
This belongs to you.
You smiled and he mirrored it with one of his own, hand impulsively taking yours, fingers intertwining with your own. Your matching bracelets reflected the dim light of the room, casting a warm glow over your faces as you smiled at each other. No longer did you feel forgotten or used. Instead, you felt loved again.
Now get off me.
Izuku laughed and slipped off of you to lay at your side, his arms pulling you in close so he could cuddle you, just like you did when you were kids. He rested his forehead against yours, one hand reaching up to timidly brush against your reddened cheek, causing your eyes to flutter shut, and a small sigh to escape your smiling lips. He missed seeing you smile, but there was still something else that he needed to take care of before you drifted off to sleep.
Traveler?
He asked.
Yes?
You sighed, sleepily.
Don't ever feel like you have to keep quiet anymore, alright? Please, always talk to me.
You blinked, your mouth opening and closing several times.
Okay.